Hi guys, for this station we're going to talk about how to create a memorable character using dialogue, gestures, description, and details. And the examples on your anchor chart are actually from this book called Marshfield Dreams When I Was a Kid by Ralph Fletcher. And so we're going to take a look at this example so that you have a better idea of how to create a memorable character in your own writing. So we're specifically looking at page 85 of his book titled Friends. So on your table you should see a packet of the chapter copied so that when I'm reading you can read along with me. So please go ahead and locate a copy of that page, please, in that chapter. What we are going to be paying attention to, like I said, is how Ralph Fletcher uses these three techniques to create memorable characters. So what I would like you to do in your composition notebook is we are going to create a three-tiered chart. And I want you to go ahead and follow along and do these things as I say them. So if you need more time, just go ahead and pause the video. So at this time, go ahead and grab your composition notebook and find a blank page. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a three-tiered chart. Let's call this Marshfield Dreams. Marshfield Dreams, because that's the title of our book. And go ahead and put the date. And then we're going to make a three-column chart. So dialogue, gestures, and description or detail. And draw my lines. I'm probably going to take up most of the page here. And we're going to focus on the character Larry. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in my title. So, like I said, if you need to, go ahead and pause so that you can create this chart. So now that you have the chart ready, I'm going to go ahead and read from this chapter by Ralph Fletcher. And what I would like you to do as I'm reading, once the character Larry is introduced, pay attention to what Larry says, his gestures, like things he does with his body language, his hands, his feet, and then also any description or detail that Ralph Fletcher might use to describe Larry. And then as you notice those examples, I want you to pause the video and write them in your three-column chart. We'll do the first one together. So let's go ahead and read from the book if you could follow along with me. Okay, this is called Friends When He Was 10 years old. Andy Hunt lived next door. I loved the way his eyes crinkled up when he heard something funny. When Andy laughed, the whole world lit up, like the sun coming from behind a cloud. His black hair hung straight down, and he'd shake water out of it like a wet dog after we went swimming. Every day I knocked on his back door, or he knocked on mine. If he wasn't home, I'd wait for him outside, and it seemed like forever until the Hunt's car finally pulled into the driveway and Andy ran over to play. Alright, so already I noticed in the very first chapter, Ralph Fletcher, our author, described Andy Hunt, and he gave us this really great simile of how Andy laughed, but I am paying attention to Larry. So if I was paying attention to Andy and how he laughed, I might have put that under gestures or description and detail, but I'm still only paying attention to the character Larry. So let's keep going. We're on page 86. Steve Fisherman lived on a small farm that was visible from our house, though you had to cross Route 3A to get to it, and that was a busy road. He was one of the only Jewish kids I knew. The kitchen in his house had a wild, spicy smell that I loved. Steve and I played music in his room, fooled around with his father's barbells, and talked endlessly about a girl we both loved. Mr. Fisherman was strict. Steve had an unbelievable number of chores to do before he could play with me. I helped him so he'd get done faster, but sometimes Steve ran off before his chores were finished. When that happened, his father always found out and sent Steve to his room. Mr. Fisherman never told me I had to leave, but with Steve in his room, there was nothing for me to do, so I get on my bike and ride home. I took it hard whenever my friends got punished. It felt like I was getting punished too. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Larry. So while I'm reading, pay attention to what Larry says, gestures that he might do with body language, and any description or detail where the author might describe what he looks like. All of these 3 techniques Ralph Fletcher uses to make Larry Waters like really stick out in your mind and be a memorable character through this chapter. Larry Waters lived down the street in an old farmhouse that had all kinds of attics, tool sheds, root cellars, workshops, garages, haylofts with real trap doors, barns, and even an underbarn. It was the perfect house for playing hide and seek or war. I loved going over there. There were 10 kids in Larry's family, and his house was always jammed with toys. Larry had a Milky Way of freckles and a mane of red hair, and he was the strongest kid I knew. Okay, so at this point, you need to be ready to pause the video anytime you hear Larry speak through dialogue, anytime the author gives gestures or describes him with great description and detail. So if you notice, we just had this great metaphor where we're getting Larry's freckles being compared to a Milky Way. So I'm going to write this down in description and detail, and you should do the same thing. So I'm going to put Larry, and I'm quoting this, had a Milky Way, ooh, if I could spell, of freckles and a mane of red hair. I'm going to end it there, and that's from page 87, because when it says he was the strongest kid I knew, that's not really as descriptive as I'm looking for. Okay, so as I read, I'm not going to stop anymore and give you the answer. I want you to pause as you go and go ahead and fill in this chart. So anytime I say something and you notice it helps us understand the character Larry, I want you to pause and decide where that fits in our chart and go ahead and write it down. I guess he'd been toughened up from the pounding he got from his big brothers. But those brothers passed down some great-looking sweaters to him, and Larry ranked us out for the pitiful clothes we wore. So again, this is a detail about what Larry is wearing, so I probably want to write that down. He had style, and he could curse like nobody's business. When he opened his mouth, a fantastic flood of swears would come spilling out. I don't mean 1 or 2. I mean a whole stream of interconnected curses. And Larry was funny, too. One of the commercials on TV had a jingle that went like this. My advice, sir, get de-ice, sir. Larry preferred to sing the song this way. My advice, sir, treat my friends nicer, or you'll get a big fat lip. The 4 of us, Andy, Larry, Steve, and I, were all in the same grade. We called ourselves the 4 Stooges. With my brother Jimmy, I spent most of the time in the woods, climbing trees, exploring, looking for stuff. With my friends, I spent more time inside, talking and trying to crack open the great mysteries. Death, God, girls. One day we talked about kissing. Thing is, you don't just kiss her quick and then it's over, Larry said. Yeah, Andy agreed. What would you know, Larry shot back. Your ma's the only girl you ever kissed. Laughter. Kissing takes a long time, Larry continued. One kiss might last 5, 10 minutes. Pause. Yeah, Steve put in. You gotta hold your breath. Tough luck, guys, Larry grinned, leaned back, and loudly cracked his knuckles. I can hold my breath 15 seconds longer than any of you jokers, so when it comes to kissing, I'll be king. Okay, so at this time, if you need to look back, if you haven't filled in your chart, go ahead. Now, I don't expect you to write down everything Larry said, but really think about the memorable details, memorable dialogue that makes up the character he is. And if you need to, look back in the text. Okay, so that was Ralph Fletcher's Marshfield Dreams. If you notice in that chapter, even though he had a couple characters in his story, Larry stood out as the most memorable, at least to me. So you want to do the same thing in your story. You may have a couple different characters, but one character needs to really stand out and be memorable. So this time, that's all I have for you for this lesson. So you can go ahead and look up on the board. So if you finish early, you can go ahead and start that activity. Again, trying to create a memorable character and thinking about what they would say through dialogue, gestures, description, and detail.